Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Spiritual Survival Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Brown. Our team's mission is to help you have eyes to see the times we are living in. Take unprecedented measures to prepare yourself spiritually for the events that will precede the second coming of Jesus Christ. If the mission of our podcast resonates with you, please click subscribe, like, and share this content. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Spiritual Survival. I'm thrilled today to have Todd McLauchlin back with us. Welcome, Todd.
Good to see you, brother.
I would describe Todd as a deep gospel thinker. And Todd and I, we just met on this podcast. I think it was about a year and a half ago. And, we've become friends online, and I've always wanted to get a chance to attend an endowment session with Todd. I always thought that would be incredible to pick his brain in the celestial room. And so a few weeks ago, I was in St. George with my family, and Todd was available, so we actually did an endowment session together, and got to chat for quite a while in the celestial room afterwards, and it was fun to see. My wife actually said, "Did you see how excited Todd got?" And I noticed that his face kind of lit up as we started talking about certain things, and one of the things we talked about was altars, and he mentioned to me that he's been having a lot of insights and I guess learning through the Spirit about altars, and I shared with him that I've kind of been having the same thing. I've been thinking about altars for a while, and so I think that's kind of where I'd like to go with this conversation. We have the physical representation of what an altar is, but what really is an altar? What is it in the spirit realm? And why are altars at the center of temple worship? And for all of you who didn't see Todd's episode on Stick of Joseph that just came out, I'm going to recommend watching another channel.
Take a big risk on that.
Yeah. I think his conversation on what is the true order of prayer and how it ties to the brother of Jared parting the veil. For me, it was just absolutely delicious. And I hope maybe that is a good segue into what we're going to talk about today with altars. So yeah, definitely would recommend checking that out. So Todd, maybe we start out by defining what an altar is. I think I've tried to talk to a few people about this, and a lot of people haven't really thought about it. For me, I would say an altar is a place of covenant, a place of sacrifice, a place where a law is fulfilled. Where would you go from there?
Yeah, so like when you and I talked about this, and as we were coming together in a mutual learning experience together, talking and discussing, those kind of gospel discussions are always the best when you're both just learning in real time, both from what you're saying to each other and as the Spirit is informing that conversation. We both recognize that the hard thing about this discussion is to break our minds out of thinking about an altar that you're building, or like an altar in the temple, or going up into a mountain and building a rock altar or something. So that I think maybe the core starting place would be to let's separate it out. Like let's almost put the whole idea of a physical altar on a shelf, like not even use that paradigm, and just talk about the principle of an altar. And also because I think it really kind of makes people nervous. You're building altars, like there's nothing that probably makes someone more spiritually suspicious than having an altar. So this isn't like this discussion isn't some lead up to like, okay, now go build your altar. It's not at all. Like, and in fact, I don't have really any opinion on that in context of this conversation. This is separate from that. So if the listener can sort of just sort of suspend their thinking about altars being physical things that you go, worship on or do sacrifices on, they can suspend that. Let's talk about the idea of an altar or the principle of an altar and what an altar is. So let's just suspend the physical and just talk about the concept. And this gets very, very powerful very, very quickly when we kind of start formulating a variety of possible definitions of what an altar is. And so these are just suggestions of ways to think about it. We're not trying to be dogmatic. We're not trying to say this is this and come up with some new crazy doctrine or some doctrine that's unusual or whatever. Let's just talk about different formulations of how to think about the principle of an altar. And um, it's hard because this really is outside the purview of how we kind of think about things. So it's a very new conversation, right, Randy? Like it in as we kind of talked, didn't you find that like you kind of walk through it and all of a sudden there's like this click point where it kind of comes together, and then all of a sudden you can't
Yeah.
help but to see everything through the paradigm of altars once you kind of see it.
Yeah. You and I talked probably at least 3 times on the phone. And the first time I was kind of like, okay, okay. And then, yeah, as I thought about it and as I opened the scriptures, it was like, oh, okay, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing
Mhm.
that. It's like it opened up my eyes to see things. I thought reading Isaiah opened my mind to the scriptures, but this this topic that we talked about opened the Book of Mormon, especially even more. Uh,
Oh yeah.
the things I'd never seen before. So
Yeah. So let's just invite the reader to kind of sit back and if they're interested to kind of just lean into it and just kind of consider from a very new way of thinking about old principles. And okay, so let's just set up a couple starting points. And the other starting point would be something like if it's hard for the listener to kind of track with this is my experience with it. Maybe this is yours too, Randy. I don't know. But I love 80s movies. And of course, the top of my list is, Karate Kid. And for me, Altars was a total Karate Kid moment where, it's the classic scene where Daniel is frustrated because he's sanding like the deck forever while Mr. Miyagi's fishing or he's painting
painting
the
the fence.
house. Yeah, he's painting the house, then he's waxing all his cars. And he's frustrated because he's doing very rote, mundane things over and over and over again. And he wants to learn karate and he's getting beat up in school and waxing cars isn't helping him. He gets frustrated in this moment of learning. Mr. Miyagi says to him, okay, now do all these things together. He takes him through this sequence. And Daniel realizes that all these things converge into being a black belt in karate. Like, and all of a sudden he's like, whoa, I'm a black belt. I didn't even realize it. But he was, but it was sort of like the intersection of all these very basic mundane things, not mundane, but normal things. Altars are like the same principle. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about sort of the hub of where a lot of gospel principles intersect and come together. Now, if we can see how they intersect, that hub becomes much more powerful than the principles coming into it. It's like a synergetic union of where you take very basic principles like faith and sacrifice and obedience and you bring them together in a way that you become a black belt. It becomes very, very operative and very, very powerful in actual usage as opposed to the ethereal principle. Okay, so one more setup. And this is going to require like some background theological or doctrinal perspective. Now, if this doesn't resonate with a listener, I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. It does not matter. In fact, if someone sees like something that I don't see in this, and it's like a counterpoint or a counter question, all ears because I'm learning in real time about so much stuff like this. And so, what I'd like to suggest is a way to think about the spiritual realm in a way that we don't typically talk about it, but I do believe is true. And maybe the best way to describe this is that when God goes to Adam and Eve and they're on this earth, he gives them dominion. And dominion is a really fascinating concept, principle. And may we suggest the way to think about dominion, or a way to think about dominion is that God gives man and woman dominion on the earth. And what that means is nothing happens on this earth spiritually that doesn't come through the active participation of man and woman on the earth. So God doesn't come down and he doesn't come down and just build Zion because it requires the access and the agency of those he gave dominion to, which is us. He gave us the agency to manage and to determine what is going to happen here. Same way with Satan, same way with the dark side. It does not have power just to come and kill everybody. It has to come through the access point of men and women, those who have dominion. So dominion means that what happens here, we determine. We're the entry point through our obedience or through our disobedience. We're the entry point. And so in the spiritual realm, the scriptures give us some really interesting clues. Things like all things are created spiritually before they're created physically. The Lord's Prayer, he says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is done in heaven. And the idea of us being stewards and agents of whatever power we align to, and that's what agency really sort of means in its core, is that we have the ability to be an agent of the power that we want to connect with and identify with or covenant with. So you can be an agent for the things in the dark realm, and you can be an agent of the things in God's realm, but you're always an agent. You don't have the ability to act independently of spiritual connection. So as we have dominion on this earth, we're always connecting to, and we're always replicating, and we're always giving voice to, an embodiment to, a spiritual dimension that is unseen, but it's playing itself out in the lives of the sons and daughters of God on the earth, of humans. And when you sort of like move into that paradigm and understand that nothing happens here accidentally or independently of the influence and pattern of the spirit dimension that's trying to operate on it. So everything that we do here is under the influence or agency that we give to the spiritual realms that are unseen and desire to be expressed here. So
That
we,
was actually a better explanation than the one you gave me originally.
oh, I hope so, because it's hard to explain. So I'm really thinking about how do we structure this? So someone might be listening and already go, this is just weird. This is too, and it's like, fair enough, fine. But if you have any interest at all, stay with it because we're going to like draw some stuff that we're going to tie it very quickly into the scriptures so that becomes a very powerful principle. I 100% believe this is true. I don't, when it says we have agency or we have free will, what that does not mean that you ever act as an independent free will. What it means is that you have the power to connect to animating spiritual realms that you don't see, but you connect through depending upon the spiritual principles in which you're engaging. There's no independence from those structures. Like, this is why, like, in principle, humans don't create. I am not a generator of love. I cannot, by taking thought, increase the love that I have within me. The love that I have within me comes from God and is received from God and is a manifestation from God. And if I want more love, I have to obtain it from God. I can't just develop it by taking thought. This is like in the New Testament when he says, "No one by taking thought can add 1 cubit to their stature." Right? Like, um, also, if I am expressing any type of emotion, any type of spiritual dimension, it's because I'm colluding or collaborating with something in the unseen world, whether I know it or not. And so a lot of people would say, well, and rightfully point out, well, this could be just be bypassing. This is the whole, well, the devil made me do it. And I'm just a puppet for things. There's truth in that, actually. You don't know how much you are actually probably being acted upon. But two, the principle of agency means that it's not just that like you're an avatar for something. It means that you're always actively collaborating and therefore responsible as a being a child of God for the agency that you interact with. So you collaborate. So meaning like you're just not like an empty vessel. It's that you are actively engaging, or you've done something that something could actively engage you and be bearing down on you. Like, I don't remember who it was. I think it was Joseph Fielding Smith. I need to look up the quote because it's been a while since I've looked at it. But he said, if your eyes were open, you could see the spiritual realm bearing down upon you, you would not be casual in your prayers. And so constantly we are operating in an environment where there's an unseen world constantly trying to express through us. The Lord is constantly calling to us through the Spirit, and the adversary in opposition is constantly making a case to draw us in to be responsive to his spirits. Um, so what does this have to do with altars? Well, if you have our mortal realm, our telestial realm, and the world that we're conscious of and we're operating in, and you have the spirit dimensions, and we're going to sort of represent the spirit dimension uniformly, even though we I mean, we have so little comprehension of all these dimensions that are operating. But let's just break it down to God's spirit world and the adversary's spirit world, even though that's an like a grotesque oversimplification, but it's useful in trying to build something out. Okay. How do these two worlds operate with this world? Well, it's the principle of an altar. An altar is the cross section between our realm and a spiritual domain. It's the principle of an altar. So, and it's a principle. So it's a platform that stands between us and the spiritual realms. It is I don't like using the word portal because I think it's too, it has too much connotation to too many crazy things that people would want to like, oh, that's just crazy. But it's a bridge. It's a connection point. It's a
What about the word gateway or
gateway. It's a transference point. It's a place where it's a place that the spirit world can pass through and affect and manifest in this telestial mortal world in which we live. And it's the principle of altars. So to take a step back and to kind of look at the landscape of scriptural history uh, with very little need for analysis, you can very quickly see that the scriptures are really, one way to think about the scriptures is they're just a history of altars. Like the first thing you get with Adam and Eve on the earth is them building an altar. It's the first thing that happens. They were commanded how to set this up, how to establish it, and the first thing that happens. The second story we get in the scriptures, story number 2, is a story about altars with Cain and Abel and
Mhm.
sacrifices. And if you just follow that down the line and you look at it through that paradigm, the reader of the scriptures, the student of the scriptures will very quickly see that everything is just a story of altars and their various types and usages being established to connect with God or being established to connect with heaven. And not only to connect, but to draw power, influence, and manifestation down from those other worlds into this world.
I think one of the at least for me, one of the most powerful representations of this is in Genesis 28, where Jacob has this dream. He sees this ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And he saw angels descending and ascending on it. And at the top, he saw the Lord standing above it. And he received this promise that his seed would be as the dust of the earth. Um, I mean, that's a great example of a gateway or a vision into the spirit realm and seeing something that I think was obviously very eye opening for him and for us.
Yeah. And very quickly, we can go a million different directions in talking about the different kinds of altars, because there's fundamental types of altars and what they do. And one of them is that an altar can establish a sacred space, a sacred domain on the earth
Mhm.
that can outlast the individual who established it. And so when Jacob lays and it can establish a location, a geography, a place on the earth that has that connection. So when Jacob is is going to Laban's house, his uncle Laban, um, he lays, like you said, he lays his head on the rock. Well, this is the place that Abraham had established altars, and that structure was open to him by virtue of what his grandfather had established there, giving him access to this dream and this experience. So altars establish spiritual connection in geographical locations. Altars are established within us. So to take a real quick second, like if you want perhaps one of the simplest definitions of what a temple is, I think this is probably the purest definition of what a temple is. A temple is a sacred structure established to house an altar. That's like the basic definition of what a temple is. A temple houses an altar. And so when you build a temple, it's really not the temple, it's the altar that you're establishing. And the temple is a spiritual principle where you are outlining sacred space or consecrated space that's set apart for a purpose or an intent of the type of altar that you're going to establish. So getting very kind of esoteric very quickly, very literally, our bodies are temples because they establish an environment or a sacred space that altars can reside within us. So we're going to take this out of the physical and put it very much into the principle spiritual. So your mind is an altar. It might be the most common altar there is on the earth, because in the mind is where we receive spiritual communication first. It's the widest open altar that um, the adversary or the Lord could offer an invitation into that place. What you do in your mind is you are mitigating between spiritual realms and this realm. It's an entry point. And so your mind literally becomes an altar. Your heart is an altar. So your body is a house for altars. And this is why when you pray with all the energy of heart, it's an altered experience. When you pray in your mind, you're engaging and communicating in your mind and your heart. You are engaging the altars of the body of your temple to commune with God. And then, in your home, as you pray, whether it be next to your bed, and how conscientious you are of what's being established in your home and in places, you're by virtue of praying anywhere, all prayer is an altar act. It's an act where you are transecting two worlds. You're engaging two worlds. So the more we conscientiously understand how altars work, the more we can conscientiously engage those worlds, right? Like the Lord. And so there's some fundamental principles that govern altars, and we can kind of talk about them pretty basically. And so if you think of an altar being like a bridge between two domains, um, on this side, on the earthly side, you always have somebody who has stewardship over or conducts or has the access to and the knowledge of how to run the altar. And that is by definition a priest. So I think in the purest definition, we've talked a lot about priesthood. We talk about it usually in orders, like priesthood's an order. But what priesthood is it's an order. Um, it's an order of altars. Like the definition of a priest is someone who knows how to operate an altar. And all altars are based upon a law that is given. And all dark altars, unrighteous altars, are based upon a law that is broken.
Hmm.
So what gives the adversary access to the hearts of men and to the minds of men, and what gives the adversary expression on the earth is always through the channel of a broken law, a broken commandment, a broken law of God that gives him power and access to a portion of dominion. And so God's altars are always based upon a portion of his law, whatever he's giving. And altars are always activated, energized, empowered by the sacrifice that the Lord gives for that altar. So the Lord always commands the sacrifice. And if you know the sacrifice and how to keep the law of that altar, you have the access and the power of that spiritual connection point. That's kind of the basic principles. So there's one other principle that's very helpful for me to understand, and it's a little bit outside the domain of normal conversation that we might be having. And that is, you don't just have one person on one side of the altar. There's always a person or an order that is on the other side of every altar in the spirit realm. And so there's always two individuals, at least, if not an order on the other side, that responds to that altar. And so the key is that you just don't get it willy-nilly, say, I'm going to build an altar, or I'm going to think of an altar, and blah, 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 and I'm going to do. No, it's always given through God. Like he establishes them, he gives you the law, and he gives you the sacrifice. And this is how something is conducted in righteousness. Something is righteous to the degree that it can fulfill the sacrifice upon the altars in which it's given. So righteousness is your fulfillment of the law of sacrifice. It's like the definition, I think, of righteousness. Righteousness is not your perfection in the law, because that's impossible. The way laws work is that the power to keep a law is the law itself. So if you break a law, you are thereby removed from the very power you need to keep it again. And so you are cut out forever. Like it's the idea of like turning off a light switch in a room. It becomes dark. And in order to turn that light switch back on, you need the light on. But to get the light on, you're caught. You're stuck. You need the power of the thing to do the thing. What gives us access to a law is sacrifice. Sacrifice gives us access to the power of a law without having the ability to keep that law first. And this is why sacrifices are incredibly powerful and incredible blessings. And Satan would have us believe that the law of sacrifice is harmful and too difficult and nothing but pain, right? Like to sacrifice has such a painful connotation to it. If we really re-understand what the law of sacrifice is, and you can go out and obtain a sacrifice from the Lord, it is one of the greatest blessings you can obtain is for him to command a sacrifice, because you cannot come up with your own sacrifices. It's against the law. You don't get to choose. But if the Lord is gracious enough to give you the sacrifice to do something, what that means is that his power cannot be restrained in that thing. So if an altar is established for him and the sacrifice is given by him, and you perform that, no matter what that altar is set up to do, it cannot fail. It has no possibility of failure if it's established by him and the sacrifice is given by him. It cannot fail.
So if the sacrifice is made, it meets the demands of the law,
Mm-hmm.
and then because God operates by law and He operates within covenants that
The law
the
is activated.
the Lord is bound.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like when he says, I, Lord God, am bound when you do what I say, if you don't know what I see, you have no promise. I think one of the primary ways to understand that verse is when you do what I say is the sacrifice I give you. So um, he establishes all kinds of altars. And so again, the reader, don't think of this in terms of like physical altars. Like physical altars are true things, but it's much broader than that. For example, if you are wanting to have greater influence with a child that you have, and you're in opposition with that child for whatever reason, you can go to the Lord and say, I'd like to establish the power and influence through your blessing in order to have maybe persuasion with the child, or to be able to talk or connect with the child, or to draw them into something. And what you can do is you can go to the Lord and you can actually ask in kind of the context of a principle of an altar, like, can I establish something that would give me the power of heaven, that would righteously create a dominion or a structure in which we can establish that this child will have great influence for this child, and I'm willing to do whatever sacrifice is required. And if you ask the Lord to phrase that right and to frame it right, to give it to you right, and he gives it to you and he gives you a sacrifice accordingly, those purposes cannot fail. And so the principle of sacrifice is how literally everything operates on the earth, from building a car to building a house to building a church to building a temple to a marriage. A marriage is completely guided by the altar as established. Your relationship to anybody is an altar. Your ability to do anything on the earth is given to you by the power of altars. So it's very important, A, to understand what altars are operating, because when you break a law and you're becoming influenced by something dark and you become subject to that, and you're wrestling with darkness, what's actually happening is you're engaged in an altar, and you have to understand how it's broken or overcome or replaced. So, like, for example, pornography, like men who are caught in this pornographic trap, which is like epidemic. It's almost ubiquitous. It's like everywhere. That is an altar. That is straight up an altar that is established. It gives power and dominion to the adversary to have influence and to capture and to captivate and have dominion over the souls of men. And you can fight against it and fight against it and fight against it, and good luck. You might beat it back for a little bit,
Hmm.
but if you don't understand the principles that are being had, you in the adversary will teach you things like, he'll once you like sin, the adversary teaches you how to repent, because he has a he has a he has a platform now to speak to you by virtue of the disconnection from God, by virtue of the sin. And he'll say, oh, you need to like self-perfect, or you need to like clean yourself up first, or prove to God that you really mean it, or prove to God that you really have effort, you know. And he'll put you into this loop and just drain you out, like just like put you, just loop you out till you just exhaust you. And he's just drawing light and energy and power and hope off of you because you're caught in an altar structure. And this is why,
It's so important, Todd, because I think so many young people are trapped in this. I think that this is actually maybe at the root of why people are maybe leaving the church, is that you say this doesn't work for me. I've tried, I've I've done everything right, and then still I'm stuck in this, and what they're stuck in is something very spiritually powerful. Um, what would you say about that?
yeah, because like when the principle of altars is digested more and more, you begin to understand that nothing happens in this realm by happenstance. Like nothing is accidental. Everything is reflecting a spiritual domain. So if you're fighting something and you think that the principle of you repenting is that you put up big enough fight to show the Lord that you've got enough strength in you for him to re-accept you or re-engage, that is straight up the adversary's doctrine of repentance. He loves that. He teaches that.
Here's, a, here's another question for you, and for the audience maybe to consider. This idea of generational dysfunctions, of covenant curses, as we might say, that
Mhm.
maybe you're stuck in a sin or an addiction um, that maybe originated with parents or grandparents or great grandparents. Would that be an example of maybe an altar being opened that affects
Yeah.
generations to
It's one
come?
of the it's one of the primary altars is that you have multi-generational bloodline altars. So for righteousness or for not. So you have someone in your family line that establishes a connection and a domain, and then that gets patterned and replicated by virtue of the power of that altar that was established. And so all of us, everyone can like immediately point to the generational stuff that they struggle with. They all. And if you become aware of how it works and how these things operate, and you become conscientious of it, then you have incredible power to repent of it. And repenting of it means the way that a dark altar or a negative thing is cast down is actually simply by by repairing God's broken altar or establishing the
Isn't the
altar.
story of Abraham like the perfect example of this? Obviously, Abraham was born into a dysfunctional situation
Yeah,
where his father and I believe his grandfather were idolatrous, and he was even about to be sacrificed on an altar, and then he actually at an altar makes this sacrifice that's so incredible and so difficult, and it seems like at that altar of sacrifice that uh, where Abraham offered, this his will. Um, Perhaps that broke or established a new altar for his posterity to escape this covenant curse and to bring a blessing upon posterity for forever.
yeah.
That making any sense?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like all of these stories are stories of altars. So if you see the principle, you see what's happening. So with Abraham, exactly as you just described, if you rely on some of the more reputable apocryphal literature, I think like Jasher, um, which I really love reading because it gives a ton of insight into what possibly very likely could have been the case, and that is that Terah, his father, is that right? Terah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was the chief idol maker for the Tower of Babel for Nimrod,
Mm. Well,
which doesn't mean he's just carving like weird idols. It's very much an altar spiritual domain that they're establishing that would empower the Tower of Babel. Like, and it's kind of like being like the chief high priest of Nimrod. And so when Abraham was born, um, in the apocryphal account, like the magicians of Nimrod, who are the priests, magician's just a priest over a different altar structure. So like the magicians of Nimrod, the priests over those altars, obtained a revelation that Abraham would overturn Nimrod's kingdom, the Tower of Babel. So he commanded him to be killed in the apocryphal, and Terah sent him away to Shem to live with Shem. So in the apocryphal account, Abraham is raised in Melchizedek. If you believe Shem is Melchizedek, which I do, he's raised in Melchizedek's household till he's 50 years old. So he's being instructed in the order of Melchizedek, which is another, just in its core, an altar covenant structure, um, before he goes back and he engages his father again and goes through the whole being sacrificed and seeking out the blessings of the fathers and the right to administer in those and then goes on into a counterpath to what his father had established to go through a series of altars and sacrifices sufficient to pull down the promises that through Abraham's lineage, that multi-generational bloodline would have access to establish the family, the covenantal family of God on the earth that would have power to redeem it because of like the alternative structure of evil was so overwhelming that God had to establish a bloodline that would persist and fulfill potentially the earth, which is the house of Israel. And so, and frankly, like you can look at like all war is based off of an altar. Um, Empires are built on altars, countries are built on altars, governments are altars. They're all ways to conduct and obtain power and dominion through the collusion or the covenant or collusion of spiritual realms that give them and empower them. And this is how everything operates, is through this principle.
Share with the audience what you shared with me about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, okay. So again, this is like
Because
100%.
this opened up everything in the Book of Mormon for me when I saw this. It's like you just see these patterns. Anyway, I'll let you go ahead.
Well, this is 100% in this like, let me just suggest a way of thinking about this. There's nothing about this that I can back up and say, just if it resonates with you, wonderful. If it helps, it's helpful, wonderful. If it doesn't, it's great. Like I this is 100% off the reservation, so to speak. But it's a suggested pattern to consider. So my belief is that when and I don't know how far to go back, but like if you really do believe the Book of Mormon is a covenantal land grant in North America had a covenantal special covenantal uh, right, which is another, by the way, altars that persists from those covenants made from long ago. That when the during the American Revolution, what happens is that you have a core group of individuals who obtain um, sort of revelation or insight from heaven about the principle and law that this land is supposed to be established on, which is a law. So whenever the Lord gives you a law that you have access to power through. So that's kind of a way to think about law is like law is a structure of power that gives you the ability to order and organize in the pattern of heaven in some degree or dimension. So law is very powerful. You want laws. The more laws from heaven you have, the better you are off because you have more power to order and organize and to become and manifest the patterns of heaven when you have a law. But Randy, let's hit the brakes for a second and maybe explain prophet, priest, and king. So
Yeah, yeah, let's do that.
um, the principle of Melchizedek is embedded in this idea of prophet, priest, and king, which the listener should probably recognize. You'll hear it in different places. Um, in a prophet, priest, and king, as Joseph Smith taught, is sort of like an ascension of ability, like not ability, but like position. So everyone is to become a prophet, like Joseph and Moses said. Everyone is to become a priest, which is what happens in the endowment. Everybody's to become a king, which is the capstone, or a queen, which is the capstone of the endowment. So prophet, priest, and king is the order of Melchizedek, to be all three. You can read about this in the book of Hebrews. An altar is ran or by the principle of prophet, priest, and king. So the idea of an altar with prophet, priest, and king is that a prophet is someone who obtains the revelation from God of the law or has the vision of what an altar can be established for, or a law that is given to them by virtue of a prophet that has the ability to receive that communication from heaven and establish it. Priest means that they have the knowledge of how to actually operate and conduct that altar. And then king means that once that altar fulfills its intended purpose and establishes the full power of the law that it's set up for, kingship is the new dominion that that altar expresses or holds. So kingship is the power of an altar that you have. So in the American Revolution, what I believe happened, this is my opinion, so all caveats beside, like all warnings coming into this. I believe that the Spirit of the Lord came along, this core group of individuals who obtained the sort of the prophetic vision of the law of freedom, God's law that should be established on this continent. And with that, they were given an altar. When you have a law given to you, an altar is established, and that altar has the power to transform the covenantal blessing into the real thing. So it's not just enough to have a vision of the future. The altar is what actually brings the power of that thing to manifest that future, to make it real. So think about the founding fathers. They have a vision of this. They they take initiative to express it, to write it out, to establish this altar, but all altars require a sacrifice to have power. So the thing that rends a veil between the spirit and domain and the physical domain is the sacrifice of the altar. When George Washington is sort of the head of everything, is the General George Washington, he is conducting the sacrifice of the altar, which means he's conducting the war. And you have the bloodshed of all the people who gave themselves in all the different ways they did on this altar for this law to come to pass. And so you have the sacrifice of the soldiers, you have the sacrifice of the people and what they had to go through. You have the sacrifice of these men who, they risked their lives very literally for this thing. They put their fortunes and their lives on the altar to say, we put everything on here. Well, that sacrifice was within the domain of commandment for that to work. And so as they do it and they perform the sacrifice, that's the key. If you perform the sacrifice, if it's given to you, the altar cannot be defeated if it's from God. Can't be defeated. So this is why some people say the American Revolution was like the only war that was won where every major battle was lost. It's a miracle. Like this altar prevails.
Hey, Todd. Um, for a lot of Latter-day Saints, I think we have to maybe slow down just a second and redefine prophet,
Hmm.
because I think for most of them, prophet just means president of the church. And in reality, that term prophet means someone who has the spirit of prophecy.
Yeah.
And I would say in this case, George Washington would qualify for that because the spirit of prophecy, it appears, came upon him like he was prepared for this. This was his life's mission.
Yeah.
His foreordained calling was to be one who through the spirit of prophecy had this vision of what this country could become and the sacrifice that it would take to deliver it from this evil dominion that ruled.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think when you start to see that, and then you start seeing things in the Book of Mormon. But anyway, um, yeah, prophet it's anyone who obtains this spirit of prophecy. And it's through that
Mhm.
spirit of prophecy that the Lord can reveal to you the sacrifices that you need to make at an altar, so to speak, and operate as a priest in offering that.
Yeah. Like exactly. So like in its purest form, we always say there's like only one prophet on the earth. We're really, 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 really inarticulate at what that. That's the
Well,
worst way to.
we also say we
Um,
have 15.
yeah, yeah, and it gets really goofy real fast because it's like, well, what is it? Are they 15 or is there one or how? And then we do all these anyway. So what that really means is that when God established the new and everlasting covenant through, by the way, the altar of this church, there's one chief high priest that's established that has the right and the responsibility to maintain that altar for and behalf the entire covenantal body, and that's the presiding president of the church, who has covenantal responsibility to obtain prophecy to run and to manage the altar of the church. That's what when we say there's only one prophet on the earth, what that really means is there's only one prophet that has covenantal responsibility for this altar of the church. But in reality, every single person on this earth is a prophet. Anybody who receives the inspiration and the vision of a spiritual dominion and executes on it is working in the principle of prophecy. Like it's just how everything runs. If you have a vision of your future, you're a prophet. If God gives you the vision of your future, you have the gift of prophecy in God's gift. And if you have an altar of your family, and you have the altar of a calling in the church, if you have the altar of a marriage, then you get and gain and you utilize the gift of prophecy in whatever domain that you are covenantally bound in. And so, yeah, you're 100% right. Like we think of like the prophet. Well, it's the prophet of this covenant, which is incredibly important. I'm not trying to undermine anything, but it's also like super like unhelpful to not understand. Like this is why Moses says, "I wish all the children of Israel were prophets." Like Joseph Smith does the same thing over and over. Like you all need to become prophets. Like you all need to be able to obtain revelation and prophecy within the dominion that is given to you, so that the Lord can bless you. And you go to an
Joseph Smith also said, sacrifice brings forth the blessings of heaven. And, we can't obtain those without the sacrifice of all things. And so it's incumbent upon us to have the spirit of prophecy, to know what sacrifice we need to make
yes,
to be this prophet, priest, and king for our families. I think in a way, President Nelson saying that by saying, um, pay the price for priesthood power,
yeah,
so that
hmm
you can in the coming day you'll be able to save your families and your marriages. And I think it's this same pattern: prophet, priest, and king.
yeah. And to rephrase President Nelson in a way that I think he would actually agree with. I think he really would when he says, "Pay the price for priest power." In this way of thinking, it would be something like, perform the sacrifice that activates the altar that draws the power of heaven in the dominion in which you received. That's what it means to pay the price. Priesthood power is the power that comes through an altar. There's no such thing as priesthood power as like its own standalone power. It's just the power that comes through engaging a righteous altar. Um, anyway, we probably have said so many things that people are like, back up. Um, so back to George Washington. So they conduct the American Revolution. The altar is established, meaning the power of that altar gives them the ability to defeat the British Empire. It's incredible. Like, and then Joseph Smith, George Washington is the king of the altar, meaning everybody's looking at him saying, okay, is George Washington going to step in and be the new king of this new world? And this is like the big great story of the founding of our country, because this man says, I will not take this thing to myself. I'm going to place it back into the law of God, into the dominion in which it's established for. And as a king, he consecrates this dominion back to the principle of God. And this is the law of consecration, by the way. Like really, like this, there's many ways of thinking about the law of consecration. This is probably one of the primary ways to understand it, that when you have the dominion of a kingship, that you consecrate that whole kingdom back to God, because this is a divergent point that all kings can make. A king can take it and run it and build his own kingdom with something. Think about this principle in your own life. Like the Lord blesses you with something, you can take that blessing and you can go build your own thing to yourself. You can take it away from the Lord's structure and enjoy it and feed off of it, or you can take it and firmly put it back into his order and allow it to grow within God's kingdom. And so altars work in this way perpetually. So if you look at US history, the next, like what, I don't know, 80 years later or something, like you come up, we have the United States that's established, this altar is established, this power. And the next thing we encounter is slavery, which is an evil altar established in opposition, but within our kingdom. It has to be purged out. But it's an altar. So Abraham Lincoln, he has the vision, the principle given to him of how to remove this. There's a war,
Spirit of prophecy.
there's an altar established, there's a sacrifice that goes on that. Abraham Lincoln is managing it.
We think of the amount of blood that was shed, the number of lives that were
It's incredible.
sacrificed to
Overcome this
down
evil.
this evil altar.
It's like, and I get it, like why people are like criticize our history, like, oh, we were slaveholders. You're like, yeah, there's two ways of looking at that. Like the whole world was slaveholders. The history of the world is the history of slaves. And for the first time in the domain that we were able to manage, we cast down that altar of evil, subjection, of dominion of Satan on the earth. Like there's two stories here.
Yeah.
Depends how you want to look at it. And so Abraham Lincoln, he has the ability to be a king over the South, to subject them, not to give them voting rights, to tax them, to make them a subject. But what he does is he gives them amnesty, total forgiveness, brings them all back in as if nothing had ever happened, and makes them full, free citizenship for the persistence of the United States of America. He takes that kingship and he puts it back into the kingdom of God in that domain, which strengthens this country in influence and power in such an incredible way that 40 years later, whatever it is, I can't do my math and history, but 40 years later, we have World War One. And World War One and World War Two is when the whole world is engulfed in the activation of an evil altar because empires are established on this principle and the world is being engulfed. And the United States has the power now and the capacity to confront that evil that's going to consume the world. And in World War One and World War Two, we have the ability to do it by virtue of the altar that was established in North America, in America. What happens at the end of World War Two? Do we go in and claim Germany? Do we take Europe? Europe's ours. Do we take Japan? We don't. I mean, if you zoom out, people can say, well, we did this and this and this. Well, yeah, we have influence and there's things set up and it is kind of complicated, but you zoom out, we took Germany and said, here, Germany, here's it back. We're going to build you and strengthen you and bless you. Here, France, we're going to build you, strengthen Britain, same. Japan, same. And what we do is we create an altar that establishes freedom in a dominion that the world has never seen before. And freedom flourishes in the world. Prosperity, there's never been a time in the history of the world that more of the poor have been elevated out of poverty than this time. Like with a very myopic view of the world, we think there's so much, it's so horrific. It is horrific. But relatively to the history of the world, it's never been flourishing more. And more of the countries that live within the dominion of the United States and operate in that structure of freedom, those countries flourish. Now, I know these are complicated and there's altars within altars and things happening, but by and large, this shifts the world. This is what opens the path of the restored gospel to build temples everywhere, is because of this altar that's established. We're building temples in Japan. I served my mission in Japan. Just a few years later, I mean, uh, 40 years later, whatever it is, I don't know, 50 years later. Um, that's crazy. My best friend went to Germany. I went to Japan. It was the big joke. We're in the two axis. We go to the two axis countries. So the point here is that altar, you can start to see how altars work and the dominion of the Lord and how these principles operate. And this happens every morning when I get up and pray. I'm essentially, whether I want to or not, whenever you pray, you're establishing an altar. You are approaching the Lord in the way that He's prescribed, and you are performing some level of sacrifice, which is whether it's like just coming to God and kneeling before Him. But if you're conscientious about the sacrifice that actually governs those altars, you can engage them forthrightly and you can become empowered way faster than haphazardly engaging and wanting to know, why does the Lord answer my prayers sometimes and other times He doesn't? Well, it's because you don't know what's going on. You don't know the altars that you're operating in. And you're not really aware of the sacrifices, and you kind of know, and you're kind of like, the more knowledge, the more you can actually be a priest. You can actually engage in priesthood. So instead of like your kid's going crazy and you're praying at night, like, please help my kid, and that's your prayer is just, please God, please help him, you're a crappy priest. Like, I'm sorry, like I shouldn't say that because that's probably going to deflate almost everybody, but embrace that and say, wait a second. Maybe heaven can instruct me in the orders and patterns of actually how to engage in a way that I can conscientiously engage the heavens. And it's not just this spray and pray and spray. Like, I hope someone hears me and helps me out a little bit. And you can,
Todd, sorry to interrupt,
no, no,
but
I talk so much. So
since we've talked, I think the thing that has been so impressed upon my mind and my heart is the depth of the sacrifice. When I think of the Revolutionary War, the horrors that some of these soldiers endured, the horrors that were endured to make the sacrifice to root slavery out of our our country. And then I think about in the Book of Mormon, the sons of Messiah. Essentially, the kingship was theirs. They were next in line to take over the kingdom, but they sacrificed it. They went out. I think it was 14 years amongst a brutal people.
yeah,
Uh, some of them spent time in prison, being beaten and starved, and but because of that deep sacrifice, it's like a new altar was opened, and these blessings came upon the Lamanites. And then some of them even laid down their lives because they made a covenant that they wouldn't take up their weapons of war, which opened more, thousands and thousands of Lamanites were saved and born again and converted. And then I think about the establishment of Zion
hmm,
and what sacrifices might lie ahead in our future in you know whatever it's going to take for Zion to be reestablished. Um, And then on top of that, I think about me as a father and, wanting to not be a crappy priest, like you just mentioned.
I should never have said that.
I want to be this priest who's willing to um, consecrate my life, to sacrifice anything that the Lord requires of me,
Yeah.
to, in essence, w- willingly, out of love and charity, um, pay whatever sacrifice is required to open the blessings on my children. Um, and I think that's so important in the time we're living in. And I know many in this audience have those same concerns. Anyway, those have been the things that have been flowing through my
Yeah.
mind. We've
And when I
talked
say
about.
crappy, and I should never say that, but when I say that, what it really, it's not because of lack of desire or purity of desire or even the desire to do anything for your kids. It's just for lack of knowledge. Like if
Mhm.
you know, if someone can share with, teach somebody, like this is how you engage the Lord in a way that's very intentional. Like, you have a problem with the child, you can go to the Lord and say, okay, um, first thing I would like to know is for me to have a clear perception of what the problem actually is. Well, what are you asking for? You're asking for the gift of prophecy. Give me an insight to what the problem actually is, because I may be misdiagnosing this whole thing. Secondly, Lord, would you bless me? And I'm asking in faith to establish a covenant, to establish a promise. In other words, to establish an altar on behalf of this child. And what is the possibility of that offering? And let him teach you. It may require going to the scriptures and mining the scriptures to understand patterns and principles, but the Lord will teach you. And then if you can engage the Lord and ask for a sacrifice and he gives it to you, sacrifices are the things that you can always keep with perfection. Laws you cannot, sacrifices you can. This is the lesson the house of Israel is trying to be taught to them. The Ark of the Covenant is an altar, right? Like the whole house of Israel, like in ancient Israel, the whole thing is the Lord trying to teach them how to use an altar to get them into a higher priesthood, which they could take the principle of the thing that they were engaging physically and manifest it out spiritually. And so what was he teaching them was the strictness of the law around the sacrifice. You don't mess the sacrifice up. If he says wake up at 10 a.m. and put the lamb on the altar and you burn it this way, he's teaching you something. He's not being weirdly religiously rigorous to be weird. He's teaching a principle that when I give you a sacrifice, you execute that sacrifice exactly as I've given to you because I've given it to you in a way that you can do that with perfection. That's the key. Like, it's not the law, it's the sacrifice that you keep. And when you do that, stand back and watch out because the Lord's altars do not fail. They don't fail. This is why it's very, very powerful. And if you want to know in a coming day, if you have some vision of the second coming and society's in collapse and there's an army coming at you and your family, and it's you versus 1,000 people, you can now move from the structure of like, please God save us to, Lord, give me the altar against this army and give me the sacrifice and I will do it with the knowledge that if you do it, that nothing can stand against you. Like that is the power of the priesthood. So you can do this with pornography. You can do it with your repentance. You can do it with your family problems. You can do it with everything, your business. If you go to the Lord, you may realize that the business you've been building, quote unquote, righteously your whole life was actually built on a false altar. What if it was, did you build it for your own ego? Did you build it for your own comfort? Can you go to the Lord and say, can I turn this into a righteous altar? What's my sacrifice? What can I bring this into your dominion? Then his purposes do not fail. If you obtain his word, it doesn't fail. And so the faster and the more conscientiously we learn these principles, we gain power in the priesthood. And to make one, I need to tie off here in a minute because I got to pick my son up from school, but all righteous altars hang on the most righteous, which is the atonement of Jesus Christ. It is being in the plumb line, lined up to his altar of the atonement of Jesus Christ that empowers all righteous altars. Everything has to be lined up to him in the order and pattern of his sacrifice. All altars that are evil, and there's an opposition line that's established, they are all fueled by the breaking of law, by sin. And so understanding those principles is core and key. This is why when Elijah defeats the priests of Baal, what does he do? He has to repair the altar first. So much of casting down oppositional forces, defeating the adversary, spiritual warfare, all of these things is done by virtue of knowing how to repent and how to fix the righteous altars that have been established. If you want to cast down multi-generational bloodline problems, learn what needs to be repaired. And you can stop those altars and those bloodlines. This I think is in many ways what it means to be a savior on Mount Zion, but in one dimension of that. So
Wonderful. I know on this podcast, we've talked a lot about what I've called mighty prayer. And with this podcast you just did on Stick of Joseph about true order of prayer, maybe we could just wrap up. And I don't know, maybe this is even a topic for another time, but
yeah,
how does opening these altars, these
yeah. If we
covenant
pay attention to
blessings, and,
yeah. So
yeah,
when we say true order of prayer, and by no means should someone be alarmed saying, "Hey, Todd's saying everybody get in your temple robes and go to your backyard and start doing the true order of prayer." Like I'm not saying this at all. What I'm saying is learn the pattern that you're observing in the temple and start replicating it and start learning how to replicate it. Like things like what leads up to your ability to pray in the true order? Obedience, sacrifice, chastity. What does chastity mean? Like the different ways that expresses itself. Being brought to a place where you're being taught what to pray. You're giving voice to the intercession of the Holy Ghost and the voice of angels. They're teaching you what to pray.
so Todd, sorry, would that be synonymous with the spirit of prophecy?
100%, because the spirit of
Being
prophecy
taught what to pray? Yeah.
is the testimony of Jesus. So like, boy, there's so much to unpack with this.
Sorry.
No, like it's 100%. So like the spirit of prophecy, spirit of revelation, yeah, like there's so much to it. I hate saying yeah, it's this thing. It's a lot of things, but yeah, 100%. So um go read D&C 50 and 3519. They might be two of the best that I'm aware of, the two best places in the scriptures that you can capture the tour of prayer in practice outside of a temple. So like, just like you do the tour of prayer, when you go to the Lord, you humble yourself before him, you reconcile yourself to obedience, not just to be obedient. You reconcile yourself to the spirit of obedience. You reconcile yourself to the spirit of sacrifice, which means you are actively seeking out the sacrifices that the Lord has in order to activate the spirit in a way that then you can be taught what to pray by the spirit, and you give voice to it. And then when you're being taught what to pray, you pray in faith, because the things that you're praying for were given to you from heaven. And that's what gives you faith. It's not like faith is not an intense desire. Please bless my business that it doesn't fail. Please, please, please. We think faith is like how much desire you can like muster up. That is not faith. Faith is being taught the principle of heaven and the power that's available to you. And when it's taught to you, you give voice and you act on it so that it comes to pass. That's faith. Or one level of faith. But so yeah, the tour of prayer is 100%. That's why you're taught this in the altar structure in the temple. Like, so just, I'm not saying go out and build an altar in your backyard. I'm just saying understand the principles that are happening and how those principles can be engaged in a way to enrich your prayer life in a way that you can intentionally draw down the power of heaven.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you, Todd. I think that's the key. We want to draw down the power of heaven, and you've given us some amazing things to ponder and think about and be taught by the Spirit about. Thank you for being with us on the Spiritual Survival Podcast. Again, if the mission of our podcast resonates with you, please click subscribe, like, and share this content.